When I passed out at my graduation ceremony, the hospital contacted my parents. They never showed up. Instead, my sister posted a photo tagging me. Family day without the drama. I stayed silent. Days later, still frail and connected to machines, I noticed 75 missed calls, and a message from Dad. We need you. Respond now. Without hesitation, Can you imagine collapsing at your own master's graduation, barely able to breathe, while doctors desperately tried to reach your family? What if your sister, the very person you'd sacrificed everything for, then posted a smiling photo of a backyard barbecue with the caption, "Family day without the drama"? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It snapped into terrifying, beautiful clarity. Story start. My name is Olivia Hart. I realized I'd spent my entire life trying to be enough for people who didn't even see me. And for the first time lying on that cold hospital floor, I decided to see myself. If you've ever reached that breaking point, that moment you finally chose you, tell me where you're watching from right now. I want to know I'm not alone in this. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. You know, the kind of place where neighbors knew everything and judged your whole life by your Christmas lights. Every December, our little one-story house was draped in gold and red, a picture of cozy, cheerful stability. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. But inside, the walls held a different story. One built quietly long before I even understood what favoritism meant. As far back as I can remember, I was the responsible one. No one said it, but it was just expected. I made my own bed. I folded laundry without being asked. I knew exactly how long to leave the chicken in the oven because Mom was usually shouting instructions from the living room, helping my little sister Sabrina find her lost sparkly shoes. By 6 years old, I could pack Sabrina's backpack, slice her apples, and braid her hair better than our mother ever could. Looking back, they treated me like a tiny adult way before I even stopped playing with crayons. Sabrina, on the other hand, was the princess. That word floated around our household as casually as the scent of Mom's vanilla candles. "Where's my princess?" Dad would call out the moment he walked through the door, even if I was the one setting the table or lugging groceries from the car. Sabrina's slightest frown was met with soothing voices and gentle hugs. My tears? They were often dismissed with a tired sigh or a reminder that life isn't always fair, Olivia. Whenever Sabrina and I fought over toys, space, or even who got the bigger slice of cake, the blame fell on me. "You're older," they'd say. "You should know better." Sabrina is sensitive. Sensitive became the shield she hid behind, and strong became the box I was locked inside. The earliest clear memory of this unfairness still feels like a fresh wound. I was around 7. Sabrina and I were playing tag in the living room, a strict no-go zone, when she bumped into me, and I slammed into Mom's favorite ceramic vase. You know, one of those tall, cream-colored ones with the hand-painted blue flowers. It crashed. Mom stormed in, eyes wide. Before I could explain, Sabrina burst into dramatic, loud tears. Mom immediately knelt beside her, cooing, asking if she was okay. I stood silently, my heart hammering. When Sabrina sobbed, "Olivia pushed me." Mom didn't question it. She just turned to me with a sharp, disappointed stare and ordered me to clean up the mess. No one asked if I was okay. Sabrina sniffled her way into Dad's arms later, telling him I was mean. Birthdays were another stark reminder. Mine were simple. A small cake, 2 candles. Sometimes a grocery store card signed by both of them at the last minute. "We'll make it up to you next year, sweetheart," they'd say, tired from work. They never did. But Sabrina's birthdays? Oh, those were productions. Banners, balloons, matching princess plates, and cups. The living room became a pink explosion. Piles of presents. All her friends over for backyard games and cotton candy. I always stood at the edge of those parties, refilling lemonade, passing out cake, while Dad snapped photos of Sabrina blowing kisses. I just smiled. Because that was my role. Smile, help, stand aside. Dad had a phrase he repeated so often it became the soundtrack of my childhood. "You're strong, Olivia. Don't make a fuss. Your sister needs more attention. She's fragile." I heard it when Sabrina took my toys. I heard it when she ruined my school project and somehow cried her way out of blame. I heard it when I tried to tell them I felt left out. And each time he said it, something inside me folded smaller, tighter, until I believed that needing comfort, or help, or even just love made me weak. Strong meant silent. Strong meant invisible. I don't think I truly understood what that belief did to me until years later. But one memory stands out like a quiet bruise. I was 8. It was winter. I had a fever that made my whole body feel heavy and floaty. I curled up on the sofa, shivering, waiting for Mom to sit with me to stroke my hair, the way she did with Sabrina if she even sneezed once. Instead, Mom and Dad rushed around, getting Sabrina ready for her dance recital. Her tiny red costume glittered. Dad called her picture perfect as she twirled, giggling. When Mom finally noticed me, she just said, "We'll be back in a couple of hours. There's soup in the fridge if you're hungry." They left in a hurry, Sabrina shouting, "Wish me luck." As the door closed, I watched the house get dark with the setting sun. Wrapped in my blanket, alone with the sound of the heater. I must have fallen asleep waiting. Even now, decades later, I can still picture that dim living room, the ticking clock, the ache behind my eyes. That was the night my body learned what my place in the family was. It was the first time my body understood. When I needed someone, no one was coming. By the time I was old enough to put words to it, I had already learned a quiet, painful truth. Strength was just another word for enduring everything alone. And without realizing it, that was the day my body began practicing how to stay silent, how to keep going even when it was breaking. Just like my heart would learn to do for years to come. By high school, those labels, me as the strong one, Sabrina as the sensitive one, had set into our family's foundation like permanent ink. I desperately wanted things to change. I wanted my responsibility and goodness to finally be seen, not just assumed. So I threw myself into school. I studied late, volunteered at the library, worked part-time stacking books, and dreamed quietly about a future where I could help people who felt as invisible as I often did. I imagined becoming someone who listened, who cared, who didn't walk past other people's pain the way my parents had walked past mine. That dream kept me steady. It gave me something gentle to hold on to. Sabrina, on the other hand, seemed to transform into the kind of teenager every parent claimed to fear but secretly excused. Mall trips, ever-changing hair colors, drifting in and out of trouble. When she got caught vaping, she's going through a phase. When she skipped a whole week of classes for a boyfriend, they grounded her for a day, then let her go to a concert because she already had tickets. Every misstep she made was brushed off with a shrug and a sigh. Meanwhile, every small mistake I made felt like a mark against the perfect record I was expected to maintain. But the moment that carved itself deepest into me happened on a rainy Wednesday during junior year. Sabrina had borrowed the family car, Dad's precious tan Toyota Camry, without permission. She ended up scraping the side of a parked vehicle in the grocery store lot. When she got home, shaking and babbling about how she could get expelled if the school found out, Mom went white and Dad paced. Then, almost in unison, they turned to me. I remember the look on Dad's face. Desperate, stern, certain. "Olivia," he said, "you need to tell the officer you were the one driving. Your sister can't afford to have this on her record. You're responsible. You can handle it." I wanted to scream. Why is it always me? But Sabrina was sobbing so loudly, I couldn't hear my own pulse anymore. And Mom kept rubbing her shoulders saying, "We can't let this ruin her future." I don't know what ruined me more, their expectation or the ease with which I finally nodded. So when the police officer came, notebook in hand, rain dripping from his hat, I lied. I told him it was me. Me who had borrowed the car. Me who had misjudged the space. Me who had panicked. That lie became an official note in a report, a small but permanent bruise on my record. Meanwhile, Sabrina stood behind the living room curtain, peeking out at the patrol car, untouched, clean. Her future neatly protected behind the fragile curtain of being the sensitive one. I remember standing in the hallway after the officer left, feeling the cold tile under my feet and the heavy silence between the four of us. No one thanked me. No one asked if I was scared. Dad just clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "That's why we can count on you." In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not violently, just quietly enough for me to hear it. I wasn't a daughter. I was a shield, a solution, a tool. The loneliness that grew from moments like that seeped into parts of me I didn't have names for yet. I found myself lingering after school, staying in the library, where the quiet shelves and the soft hum of fluorescent lights felt safer than home. One afternoon while I was reshelving novels, Miss Parker, the school counselor, stopped beside me. She had kind eyes, the kind that made you feel seen even when you weren't looking for attention. "Olivia," she said, "you've been spacing out lately. Everything okay?" Those words, simple, ordinary, felt like someone had opened a window in a room I'd forgotten was stifling. I hesitated, but then something inside me just spilled out. I told her about the vase, the birthdays, the car incident, the way I felt like a ghost in my own home. She listened without interrupting, without minimizing, without telling me to be strong. And when I finished, she said softly, "You deserve a life where you're not carrying everyone else's weight." She was the first person to suggest I apply for colleges out of state. "Boston," she said, "has schools with excellent social work programs and abundant financial aid for students like you." The idea of leaving Pennsylvania felt impossible at first, terrifying even. But it also felt like breathing for the first time in years. I filled out applications late at night, when everyone else was asleep, typing silently in the dark, afraid my dreams would make too much noise. Weeks passed, then months, and one spring afternoon an envelope arrived. A partial scholarship to a university in Boston. My heart raced, my hands shook. For the first time, the future felt like something I might be allowed to choose. When I told my parents, the reaction was immediate and crushing. "Boston," Dad repeated, as if I'd announced I was moving to Mars. "Why on earth would you go that far away?" Mom crossed her arms. "Who's going to help out around here? Your sister can't handle things on her own." They spoke as if the entire decision rested not on my ability or my hard work, but on their needs, their convenience, their comfort. For the first time, I pushed back. My voice trembled, but it didn't break. "I can work part-time," I said. "I'll cover whatever the scholarship doesn't." I need to do this for me. They didn't applaud. They didn't hug me. They didn't even look proud. Dad sighed, one of those heavy dramatic sighs meant to guilt me into backing down. Fine, he muttered. But don't forget, family comes first. That sentence felt like a chain being looped around my wrist. But I tucked away the hurt, packed my bags, and accepted the silence that followed. The day I left our little Pennsylvania town, the sky was gray. The air smelled like rain. I loaded my suitcases onto a bus that would take me to a life I could barely imagine. Glancing back at the house, I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I became successful enough, they would finally see me, finally choose me. As the bus pulled away, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. If I become someone worth being proud of, maybe one day they'll love me the way I've always loved them. I didn't know then how terribly wrong I was. Boston felt like another world when I first arrived. Bigger, louder, faster than anything I had ever known. The air smelled like roasted coffee, damp brick, and ambition. It should have been overwhelming, but instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. For once, my future felt like it belonged to me. I threw myself into college the same way I had thrown myself into everything else, with quiet, desperate determination. My days started before sunrise. I worked the opening shift at a coffee shop, tying my apron in the dim light. By 8:30 a.m., I was sprinting across campus to make it to my morning lecture. Afternoons were spent in the library reshelving books, a quiet, gentle space I desperately needed after years of living inside chaos. Sometimes pushing carts through the aisles, I'd imagine my younger self hiding between the shelves. Tiny, tired, longing for quiet, finally finding it here. Evenings were for studying. Nights were for catching up. Weekends were for extra shifts. I lived on instant noodles, clearance bin vegetables, and coffee I made by accident at the shop so I could drink it for free. I didn't go to parties. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't explore the city. Everything I earned went into survival. Or at least it was supposed to. It started small. Just $50 here, $100 there. Mom called one night during midterms sounding stressed. Your dad's hours got cut, she said. We're short on the electric bill. Can you help out a little? I wired her $100 the next morning before buying groceries for myself. A week later, Dad called about the water bill. It's just temporary, he said. You're always so responsible. He said it like a compliment, but I heard the chains tightening. Still, I sent another $100. Then came Sabrina. Of course it did. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a frantic message from her. Can you please help? My credit card is maxed and I need to pay rent or they'll kick me out. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the part shaped by years of your strong Olivia, grabbed my wallet. I sent her money I couldn't spare, telling myself it was just this once. It wasn't. Every bad decision Sabrina made seemed to land at my feet. When she overdrafted her checking account because she bought concert tickets instead of groceries, I covered it. When she quit her job after 2 weeks because her manager looked at her wrong, I covered her rent again. When she got into a minor fender bender and needed money for repairs, I skipped buying textbooks for myself and borrowed them from classmates instead. Each time I tried to push back, my parents reminded me, your sister is under a lot of pressure. You know she's not as strong as you. And each time, I felt the old guilt rise in my throat until I swallowed it down. Some days I was proud. Helping felt good, felt meaningful even when it hurt. I told myself that family was worth sacrifices, that maybe love was measured in how much you were willing to give. Other days, the resentment sat heavy on my chest. I'd walk past shop windows and see shoes or coats I desperately needed. But the moment I reached for my wallet, I'd remember Sabrina's messages and close my hand again. It became a silent ritual: want, reach, stop, send money home. My body eventually began to protest. One afternoon during sophomore year, I stood up too quickly in a lecture hall and the room spun violently. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor. I brushed it off. Dehydration, I told concerned classmates. A few weeks later it happened again, this time on the bus. The driver gently shook me awake, asking if I needed medical help. I apologized, convinced myself everything was fine. I didn't have time to be sick. People needed me. My family needed me. And I had learned long ago that my needs didn't matter anyway. Years passed in this rhythm: work, school, send money, repeat. Eventually, I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I remember holding the diploma, feeling its weight, thinking maybe finally someone will be proud. I called my parents, expecting excitement. Oh, we knew you could do it. Instead, Dad said, that's great, Olivia. Listen, Sabrina is in a tough spot again. And just like that, my accomplishment shrank, swallowed by their never-ending emergencies. Still, something inside me held on. I found a job quickly, an entry-level social support position at a nonprofit in Boston. Didn't pay much, but it mattered. I helped teenagers in crisis, families struggling with housing, people who felt unseen. Maybe I gravitated toward them because I understood that feeling too well. My parents told everyone in Pennsylvania that their daughter worked in community services, as if it was their achievement. They bragged about how proud they were. But when I called home, it was clear nothing had changed. They still needed help. Sabrina still needed rescuing. And I was still the one expected to step up, without hesitation. I didn't realize it then, but the path to my collapse began in these years. In the small sacrifices, the quiet exhaustion, the crushing weight of always being the strong one. Looking back, those were the years my heart began whispering warnings I wasn't ready to hear. And my body, already strained, was just waiting for the moment it would finally give out. By the time I settled into my job, a quiet but persistent thought began forming. An ache, a longing for something more. I loved the work, but my role had limitations. I saw how much more licensed clinicians could do, the doors that opened, the salaries they earned, the impact they made. I wanted that. I wanted the training, the deeper skills, the chance to lift others in ways I had never been lifted. And in the quiet corners of my mind, I also wanted the financial stability that had always slipped through my fingers like water. So during one late-night shift, I opened my laptop and started researching master's programs in clinical social work. Boston had some of the best. When I told my parents, the reaction was instant and sharp, like touching a hot pan I didn't realize was on. More school. Dad scoffed. Why don't you focus on working? The family needs you. Mom added. Your sister is still trying to find her footing. A master's isn't cheap, Olivia. We can't help you. You know that. The implication was clear. Anything I chose that didn't directly benefit them was selfish. I was expected to help, to support, to fill in the gaps, not to grow. But something in me refused to shrink this time. Maybe it was Boston's air, colder and clearer. Maybe it was the faces of the teenagers I helped, who wished they had someone like me in their corner. Maybe I was just tired. Tired of being used. Tired of giving pieces of myself away like loose change. So I applied to 3 programs. I didn't tell my parents until I received the acceptance email. The financial aid package included a partial scholarship, permission to work, and the option for student loans. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. For once, possibility felt like enough. My father didn't congratulate me. He didn't even pause to consider what this meant to me. So you're taking out loans now, he said. Great, just great. More debt. What if something happens to us? What if your sister needs help? Mom chimed in. This is a lot, Olivia. Are you sure you're not doing too much? I wanted to laugh. If only they knew how often I wondered the same thing. But I simply said, yes, I'm sure. Once the semester began, my life became a carefully balanced chaos. I worked full-time at a community hospital, the halls always smelling of disinfectant. I attended classes at night, rushing across the city with my backpack bouncing. I studied during lunch breaks on the subway, in the laundry room. And every weekend, instead of resting, I covered shifts on a crisis hotline, listening to trembling voices, walking strangers back from the edge with soft, steady words. But no matter how busy I was, my family always knew how to reach me. The electricity bill is overdue, Dad would text. Can you cover it? Sabrina lost her job again, Mom would say. She's embarrassed. Can you help with rent? Just this month we're behind on the car payment. It's only temporary. It was never temporary. Every message felt like a hook sinking deeper into my skin, pulling me back into the role I thought I'd escaped. But the guilt was stronger than the exhaustion. So I sent money. Sometimes $100, sometimes $500, sometimes more than I could reasonably spare. I cut back on groceries. I stopped buying new shoes even when mine were tearing. I canceled every social plan because I couldn't afford to eat out. The irony of it all blurred into something almost painful one night. I had just finished counseling a patient who had survived a suicide attempt. A teenager whose parents dismissed her pain so completely, she believed ending her life was the only way to be heard. I sat with her for nearly an hour, telling her things I never told myself. Your feelings matter. You deserve support. You don't have to carry everything alone. After she was safely settled, I stepped into the tiny staff break room, washed my hands and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Sabrina, a text from Dad. We need help. Bills are piling up. Sabrina is overwhelmed. Transfer something as soon as you can. I stared at the screen, numb. A patient had just trusted me with their most fragile fears, and here I was, unable to hold my own boundaries. I transferred the money, standing under flickering fluorescent lights, my ID badge still clipped crookedly to my shirt. And as I watched the confirmation appear on my banking app, a bitter laugh rose in my throat. I spent my days teaching people how to build healthy boundaries. Yet I didn't have a single one of my own. The first seed of awakening came during a late-night class on trauma-informed care. My professor, a woman with silver hair and an impossibly gentle voice, said, "If you give and give until you collapse, that isn't love. That's self-abandonment." The room went silent. Something inside me cracked. Not the way it had when I protected Sabrina, or when my parents dismissed my dreams, but deeper. More dangerous. The words echoed long after I walked out of the classroom, down the quiet hallway, and into the cold night air. Self-abandonment. I had never heard a phrase that described my life so perfectly. It haunted me, followed me, but it didn't stop me. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let go. Not of them. Not of the guilt. Not of the version of love I had been trained to believe in since childhood. It would take something bigger to break me open. Something catastrophic. Something that would come on the day I thought was supposed to be the proudest of my life. The week before graduation was a blur of deadlines, shifts, and obligations. The hospital hallways, the smell of antiseptic, the overhead pages, the exhaustion that clung to my skin. I was finishing my capstone paper, juggling night shifts in the psych unit, and covering 2 emergency cases for a coworker with the flu. My laptop was always open, propped on my knees, glowing beside me during the short hours I slept. Somewhere in the chaos, my body began to whisper warnings I refused to hear. It started as a faint tightness in my chest, something I blamed on caffeine or lack of sleep. Then came the shortness of breath. I'd walk up a single flight of stairs and feel my pulse race as if I'd run a marathon. My hands shook when I typed. My vision blurred now and then. And the kind of tiredness I felt wasn't the usual. I need a nap kind. It was bone tired. Soul tired. As if someone had drained the last bit of life out of me, and I was still expected to keep going. A fellow clinician, Mark, noticed before I did. One evening, after I finished assisting with a crisis assessment, he caught me leaning against the wall, breathing unevenly. "Liv, you okay?" he asked, his eyebrows knitting in concern. "You don't look good." I tried to laugh it off, but even that felt heavy. "Just finals week," I said. "Once graduation's over, I'll sleep for a year." He wasn't convinced. "Go get checked out." "Seriously, you're pale." But I shook my head. "I just need to make it through one more week. I'll rest after." He opened his mouth to argue, but another emergency page pulled him away. And just like that, the moment passed. I pushed the dizziness down, hid it somewhere between my ribs, and pretended it was nothing. I gotten good at pretending. My whole life was pretending. Pretending I wasn't tired. Pretending I didn't need help. Pretending I could handle everything alone. It was familiar. It was dangerous. Meanwhile, my family buzzed louder than my health. My parents called every other night to remind me how proud they were, and how they couldn't wait to post the graduation photos. "I'll take videos of you walking across the stage," Mom said, excitement dripping from her voice. "Everyone on Facebook will be so impressed. My daughter, the master's graduate." It sounded sweet on the surface, but I knew better. It wasn't about me. It was about the image, about how they could use my accomplishments to polish their reputation in that tiny Pennsylvania town. Sabrina, of course, had her own commentary. "Just don't be dramatic, okay?" she said, chewing gum so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is supposed to be a happy weekend. You always ruin the vibe when you cry or act stressed." I remember standing in the hospital stairwell, listening to her dismissiveness echo, wondering if she had ever once considered that my stress came from carrying the weight of our entire family. And then, predictably, the true crisis arrived. One that had nothing to do with my health and everything to do with Sabrina. It was 3 days before graduation when her name flashed across my screen. The message was long, frantic, sprinkled with screenshots threatening legal action. She had defaulted on a credit card tied to some business opportunity she swore would make her rich. The company claimed she owed thousands. They were threatening to sue. "Liv, please," she typed. "If this goes to court, I'll die. I need $4,000 today. Today." I didn't even have $4,000. Not really. But my parents called within minutes, voices shaking as if they were the ones being sued. "You have to help her," Mom cried. "It's Sabrina. You know it." Dad chimed in. "If this goes on her record, it'll ruin her future. You're the only one who can fix this." That line. "You're the only one who can fix this." I had heard it my whole life, and every time it burrowed deeper under my skin. I sat in the staff break room, the smell of microwaved noodles lingering. My scrubs smeared with hours of work I hadn't even processed yet. I stared at the numbers in my bank account. It wasn't much. It was everything I had. My graduation gown was still in its plastic bag. My final project deadlines chimed as notifications in the background, and I transferred the money. Almost all of it. My hands trembled not from regret, but from an exhaustion so heavy it felt cemented inside my bones. "Thank you, Liv. You're the best sister ever," Sabrina texted minutes later, followed by a pink heart emoji. No apology. No acknowledgement of the sacrifice. Just a transactional thank you, as if I had handed her a napkin instead of my future stability. That night, the night before graduation, I barely slept. I stayed up editing my final paper, double-checking citations, and ironing my gown until my arms felt like they were made of lead. The dizziness came in waves. My chest felt tight. My legs shook when I stood. At one point, while brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection in the mirror and froze. Dark circles like bruises bloomed under my eyes. My face looked hollow, almost translucent, as if the girl staring back at me was fading. My heart thudded unevenly, each beat feeling too heavy for my chest to hold. But I still whispered to myself, "Just get through tomorrow." As if the next day would magically fix years of depletion. As if a ceremony could refill everything life had drained out of me. I set my alarm, laid out my gown, and crawled into bed with the room tilting around me. The last thing I remember thinking before I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep was, I just need to cross that stage once. Just once. I didn't know, couldn't have known, that the price of just getting through tomorrow would be my own body collapsing under the weight of everything I refused to let go. Graduation morning arrived, wrapped in the kind of bright, cold sunlight Boston is famous for in late May. The kind that sparkles on every surface but never fully warms your skin. I felt it on my face as I walked across campus in my gown, the fabric heavy against my weak shoulders, the cap tugging slightly at my hair. The university's main lawn had transformed into a sea of white folding chairs, banners trembling in the breeze. The brass band played cheerful, triumphant notes. Families filled the aisles waving flags holding signs that read, "We're proud of you," everywhere. Hugs, laughter, camera flashes. I found my seat among the hundreds of graduates. My heartbeat was loud, my breath shallow. The dizziness still lingered at the edges of my vision. I scanned the bleachers, squinting past the sun's glare, trying to spot my parents or Sabrina. Nothing. I tilted my head, searching again. I saw families holding giant bouquets. I saw fathers hoisting toddlers onto their shoulders. I saw friends waving wildly, but I didn't see my family. A vibration in my pocket made me flinch. A text from Mom. "Traffic jam. Don't worry, we'll get there soon, sweetheart." I stared at the message, trying to ignore the sinking feeling. I typed back a simple "okay," even though my fingers trembled. Maybe they really were on the way. Maybe they cared enough to try. I clung to that thought like a rope. The ceremony began. The university president spoke about resilience, perseverance, service. I heard every word but absorbed none of them. My mind kept circling back to the empty stretch of seats where my family should have been. When the dean began calling names, applause erupted for each graduate. Some names were met with entire rows of people cheering, screaming, chanting. When they reached the HS, my pulse quickened. My palms grew damp. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. Olivia Hart. For a split second, everything felt silent. Even the band. Even the wind. I stood, gripping the edge of my gown to steady myself. My legs felt heavy and numb, as though they belonged to someone else. I forced a smile as I stepped into the aisle. The world around me slowed. My ears rang. The applause blurred into one continuous, distant hum. I tried to draw a full breath but couldn't. My chest tightened painfully. The stage lights whirled in front of my eyes like melting stars. I took one step, then another. Then the floor seemed to tilt. My knees buckled beneath me. A sharp gasp froze from the audience, followed by scattered shouts. Someone dropped a water bottle near my feet. My vision tunneled into darkness, and the last thing I heard was the muffled echo of my name before everything went silent. When I opened my eyes again, bright fluorescent lights pierced through the haze. The antiseptic smell of the emergency department filled my lungs. I was lying on a hospital bed. A thin blanket draped over me. Machines beeped steadily at my side. A nurse adjusted the 4-line in my arm, and a doctor stood at the foot of my bed, flipping through a chart. His expression was concerned but calm. "Olivia, can you hear me?" he asked gently. I nodded weakly. My tongue felt thick. The doctor explained. "You've experienced severe exhaustion, possibly a combination of sleep deprivation, stress-induced arrhythmia, and dehydration. Your body essentially forced you to stop." His words floated around me like smoke. I listened, but a different question burned inside me. Did my parents come? I whispered. The doctor paused, just long enough for me to feel the truth sharpen. "We called the number listed as your emergency contact," he said carefully. "We left several voicemails. They didn't arrive. It seems they were busy." His eyes softened as if he wasn't sure whether to say more. I closed mine not because I was tired, but because the alternative was letting him see the crack forming in me. Later, when my hands had stopped shaking enough for me to reach for my phone, I unlocked the screen with trembling fingers. Notifications flooded in. Messages, missed calls, and one tagged photo from Sabrina. I tapped it, expecting maybe an update, or a question about how I was feeling. Instead, a bright, cheerful picture appeared. It was my parents' backyard. The old wooden fence, the grill smoking. Sabrina in the center holding a glass of rose, smiling wide. Mom and Dad on either side of her, plates piled with food. Friends all around. Sunset painted the sky orange behind them. The caption read, "Family day without the drama. Best decision ever." The room tilted slightly, though I knew it was just my blood pressure still adjusting. I zoomed in on the photo. I studied their faces, the laughter, the comfort, the ease. And then I looked at the 4 tape on my arm, the bruising beneath it, the pale hospital gown. I lay under harsh hospital lights while my family celebrated not having to deal with me. Shock didn't come. Shock would have felt like something. Instead, there was only a numbness so deep it almost felt gentle. A final confirmation of a truth my heart had known for years, but refused to accept. I had never really belonged there. Not as a daughter. Not as a sister. Not even as a thought worth showing up for. I lowered the phone slowly, staring up at the sterile ceiling tiles, listening to the soft beep of the monitor beside me. My throat tightened but no tears came. Not this time. Something in me had broken silently, A fracture so clean it felt like clarity. Okay, I whispered to no one. I understand now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't saying it out of obedience. I was saying it out of awakening. The first full day in the hospital felt like waking up inside someone else's life. One where the body I had always forced into obedience finally mutinied. I lay there, surrounded by machines that monitored every beat and breath. And for the first time in years, I had nowhere to run and nothing to give. Dr. Whitman, the doctor assigned to my case, visited each morning with a clipboard and the kind of expression people reserved for tragic news. He explained everything in calm, measured tones: the arrhythmia, the cortisol levels, the dehydration, the signs of neurological strain from chronic sleep deprivation. If you continue with the pace you've been going, he said one morning, pulling up a stool beside my bed, you're putting yourself at risk of long-term cardiac complications, severe anxiety disorder, major depressive episodes. You are extremely lucky you collapsed here, not alone somewhere. His words didn't frighten me the way they should have. Instead, they felt embarrassingly predictable. Like hearing the ending of a story I'd been trying not to read. Of course I was here. Of course my body finally broke. I had pushed it, ignored it, denied it for years, and now it was asking for a debt I couldn't delay anymore. Later that afternoon, I met with the hospital psychologist, Dr. Land, because the team had flagged my case as one that required mental health intervention. The irony was bitter. The helper becoming the patient. Sitting across from her, I felt stripped bare. She asked gentle but piercing questions about work, school, sleep, family. And then, almost casually, she asked, if you were discharged tomorrow, who would you call to take you home? The silence that followed stretched unbearably wide. I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out. Not my mom's name, not my dad's, not even Sabrina's. Because I knew with a clarity that felt like a slap that none of them would come. Not reliably. Not willingly. Not lovingly. My throat tightened. I pressed my nails into my palm beneath the blanket. Dr. Land didn't rush me. She simply nodded, as if she already understood the shape of my pain. It's okay if the answer is no one, she said softly. But it's important to know that. To question it. That night after she left, I cried for the first time since collapsing. Silent, exhausted tears. That soaked into the stiff hospital pillow. Not because I wanted my family there, but because I finally admitted they wouldn't be. The next day Jenna arrived. Jenna, my coworker, my classmate, and the closest thing I'd ever had to a friend who actually showed up without needing anything from me. She pushed open the door with a burst of energy the sterile room had never seen, carrying a paper bag that smelled like fresh soup and a small bouquet of wildflowers. You look like crap, she said cheerfully, then paused, her eyes softening. But you're alive. Thank God. She sat beside my bed, unpacking the food, chattering about work drama, ridiculous papers, the guy she was seeing who couldn't tell the difference between a boundary and a suggestion. Then, after a moment of quiet, she looked at me seriously and said, I heard the hospital couldn't reach your parents. So, if you want, I can be your emergency contact. I mean it. The words hit me with more force than any diagnosis. Someone wanted to be responsible for me. Not out of obligation. Not out of manipulation. But out of genuine care. It was the first time I understood what people meant when they talked about chosen family. The next morning, when the nurse brought in the emergency contact form, my hands trembled slightly. As I signed Jenna's name and crossed out the numbers that had belonged to my parents for years, it felt like cutting a thread I had been tangled in since birth. A quiet, painful liberation. With a new clarity came a strange burst of resolve. I asked the nurse for my laptop. When it arrived, I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers that had drained away over the years. Deposits to my parents. Transfers to Sabrina. Automatic payments I had set up out of habit or guilt. I clicked through every line, every subscription, every shared account. My stomach twisted as I realized how much of my life I had forfeited without even realizing it. I began shutting things down one by one. Canceling automatic payments, removing myself from shared bills, closing the joint account my parents insisted would make things easier. When I discovered that 2 utilities were still in my name at my parents' house, I emailed the companies directly. Then I booked an online appointment with a financial attorney. A small decision with enormous implications. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was preparation. Protection. For once, I wasn't moving for their benefit. I was moving for mine. That evening, lying in the dim glow of the monitor, I stared at the 4 taped to my arm. The bruising around the insertion site had turned a deep purple, spreading like ink beneath my skin. The room hummed with the steady rhythm of machines measuring my survival. And I thought with an honesty that chilled me, if I had died that day, how long would they have cried? A minute? An hour? A single Facebook post? Or would Sabrina have simply uploaded another smiling picture with the caption, less drama now? The thought didn't devastate me the way it once would have. Solidified something. A realization so sharp it felt like stepping into cold, clean air. For the first time in my life, I no longer wanted to live in a way that kept them happy. I no longer wanted to survive so they could use me. I didn't belong to them anymore. My life. My energy. My future. They were mine. And lying there under the fluorescent lights, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not abandon myself again. Not for them. Not for anyone. A few days passed in the hospital, each one slow and strangely quiet, as if time itself was afraid to move too quickly around someone so fragile. My body was still tethered to an 4-line. The cold sensors of the heart monitor clung to my skin. Stable, Dr. Whitman said, but not yet strong. My limbs felt heavy, my breath thin, my head wrapped in cotton. But inside, where the old instincts once lived, where guilt and duty used to grip me, I felt something loosening, something shifting. I didn't call my family. I didn't text them. I didn't even open their earlier messages. I simply waited. Not out of strategy, not yet, but out of curiosity. If I disappeared from their world for a few days, what would they do? For most of my life, I believed the answer would be panic, concern, love. But now, lying under sterile lights with my veins still bruised from collapsed exhaustion, I wasn't so sure. On the morning of the third day, my phone began vibrating violently against the metal bedside table. First I ignored it. Then the screen lit up again and again and again, the sound buzzing like an alarm that wouldn't stop. Annoyed, I reached over and switched off the silent mode. The vibrations grew even more frantic. When I finally unlocked the screen, everything froze. 75 missed calls. From Mom. From Dad. From Sabrina. Dozens of messages flooded the notification center. Long chaotic threads that came in waves. Some were accusatory. Why are you ignoring us? What do you mean by this silence? Others tried guilt. We're worried. You can't just disappear like this. And then the tone shifted to desperation. Pick up. It's urgent. Call now. Live, please. But the one that sliced through everything was a single text from Dad. Short and commanding. As if I were a tool left out in the yard instead of his daughter lying in a hospital bed. We need you. Answer immediately. The words triggered nothing warm in me. No flicker of hope. No sense of belonging. Instead, a coldness spread slowly through my chest. A chilling clarity. This wasn't about love. They didn't know I was in the hospital. They weren't panicking because they thought I was hurt. They needed something. And after a lifetime with them, I knew exactly what it meant when they needed me. Instead of calling back, I sat there, breathing through the ache in my ribs, and scrolled through the messages in reverse order. The earliest ones were almost mocking in contrast. Dad had sent a picture of their backyard barbecue. Another one, different angle, but this time accompanied by the caption, "Another great family day. Shame you missed it." Mom had replied with emojis. Sabrina had posted a selfie by the grill with the caption, "Better without the drama." I stared at those images, then watched as hours later the tone darkened. Liv, answer your phone. Pick up. We need you. Sabrina's in trouble. Call us now. Don't you dare ignore us. My pulse steadied. Not from calm, but from confirmation. I kept scrolling. Soon bits and pieces of the truth formed a shape. Messy at first, then clearer with every message. Sabrina had been in a car accident. A serious one. She'd been driving recklessly, possibly intoxicated, and hit another vehicle. Insurance wouldn't cover the full damages. The other driver was threatening legal action. There were police reports, court documents, a bank involved. My stomach tightened as I read further. A sick familiarity washed over me. At some point, God knows when, my parents had used an old digital copy of my signature. They had put my name on a loan. Not a small one. A substantial sum, supposedly taken out for family reasons. In the messages, Mom tried to downplay it. It's just a technicality, she wrote. We did it to help Sabrina. She needed a co-signer. Then the truth sharpened. The bank now needed my confirmation, my physical signature, my voice on the phone. The documents had reached the stage where my direct involvement was legally required. Without it, everything they owned, everything they feared losing, was at risk. Of course they needed me. Not because I had collapsed. Not because I was hurting. Not because I was their daughter lying in a hospital room alone. They needed me because their lies finally caught up to them. My hands trembled, not out of fear, but from a hollow, exhausted anger. My forehead tugged slightly as I shifted in bed, the needle pressing deeper into my skin. I thought about all the nights I stayed up working, all the money I sent home, all the times I sacrificed my own stability so they could pretend our family was functional. And still, even now, they saw me not as a human being but as a solution. A safety net. A wallet with a pulse. I opened the last message from Dad again. We need you. Answer immediately. The entitlement was staggering. The lack of hesitation. The assumption that I would always pick up, always fix, always save them, even from disasters they created themselves. A slow breath left my chest as I stared at my bruised arm, the 4-line, the cold room around me. And there it was, the truth. As bitter and undeniable as the antiseptic smell I couldn't escape. Even lying here, half broken, barely recovering from the collapse my life had spiraled into, they still didn't see me. They saw what I could provide, what I could cover, what I could sacrifice. I leaned back into the stiff pillow, letting the numbness settle. And with a clarity that felt like steel cooling into shape, I whispered the words that would close the chapter of my old life. Even now, with needles still in my arm, they don't see a daughter. Pause. They see a walking wallet. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt for thinking it. I felt truth. The morning after the storm of missed calls, the hospital room felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just me, more awake, more aware, stripped of the fog I had lived under for years. The nurse had just changed my bag. The clear liquid dripping like a metronome, steady and indifferent. My phone sat on the rolling tray beside me, its black screen reflecting the fluorescent lights like a tiny, fragile mirror. I stared at it for a long time, not with fear, not with guilt, but with a strange, quiet clarity. If this conversation was going to happen, and it clearly needed to, I wasn't going into it alone. Not this time. I messaged Jenna first. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the video meeting with the financial attorney I had contacted days earlier. When both of them were present, their faces glowing on the screen like calm, steady anchors, I finally reached for the phone. My fingers hovered for only a second before I pressed call, then switched to speaker. Mom answered on the first ring, sobbing so loudly it almost distorted the sound. Olivia, thank God. Dad's voice cut in, equally dramatic. Why would you scare us like that? We thought something happened. I leaned back against the stiff pillow, letting their theatrics bounce harmlessly off the white walls. Worried to what extent? I asked softly. Because when the doctors called to tell you I collapsed at my graduation ceremony, you didn't show up. You didn't even call back. The silence that hit next was thick, heavy, guilty, but not in the way guilt should feel. It was the kind of silence that comes when masks slip, and people scramble for new excuses. Dad recovered first. Don't bring up the past right now, he snapped. This is not the time. Your sister is in trouble. Mom added quickly. The family needs to stand together. Family doesn't abandon each other. Your sister is in crisis. You're the most successful one. If you don't help, then who will? There it was. The script I had known by heart since childhood. My achievements only mattered when they could be used. My stability only mattered when it could be drained. My worth only existed in what I could provide. But for once the lines didn't pull me in. They pushed me out. I kept my voice calm, almost steady. My doctors say I collapsed because I've been burning myself out. Work stress, no sleep, no boundaries. Do you know why? Because every time something happened to Sabrina, you called me. Every bill, every mistake, every crisis. I've been carrying all of it. Alone. Dad scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. You always think you're the victim. We raised you. We gave you everything. Everything. I repeated, quietly enough to make them pause. You gave Sabrina protection. You gave her support. You gave her excuses. You gave her second, third, 10th chances. What exactly did you give me? Besides responsibility and silence. Mom inhaled sharply, wounded. We did our best. You're twisting things. Am I? I asked. Jenna watched silently from the laptop screen, her face steady. The attorney took notes. Dad's frustration cracked into anger. Stop talking back. This is about your sister's accident. She's facing lawsuits. The loan is in your name. You need to fix it. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling my heartbeat steady against the monitor's beep. When I opened them again, I felt something stronger than fear. Choice. Actually, I said, the loan is not my responsibility. You used a scan of my signature illegally. The bank needs my confirmation now, and I'm not giving it. A beat. Then Dad exploded. Are you crazy? You have to sign. If you don't, we could lose the house. Mom started crying harder. You're destroying this family. And then, like flipping a switch, everything inside me went still. This family left me alone in the hospital, I said slowly. If that's what you call family, then I choose not to belong anymore. The words hung in the air like the first crack of thunder before a storm. But instead of fear, I felt a strange lightness, like I had finally set down a burden I didn't know how to name. Dad's voice turned sharp and venomous. You're ungrateful. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I didn't negotiate. The version of me who once would have apologized, cried, begged, reasoned, she was gone. I breathed in once, deeply remembering Dr. Land's gentle voice. My professor's words about self-abandonment. The years of exhaustion carved into my skin. And then, without thinking twice, I finally chose myself. No, I said. I will not sign. I will not pay. I will not save anyone anymore. Mom gasped as if the words themselves had struck her. Dad sputtered in disbelief. I continued, steady and unshaken. I've already spoken with my attorney. I'm removing my name from every account, every bill, every loan, every shared document. You no longer have permission to use my signature or my information. If you do, I warned, if you try anything else, I'll pursue legal action. You wouldn't dare. Dad shouted. I would, I replied. And I will. The truth settled heavily between us. They weren't losing me that day. They had lost me years ago. This was just the moment they finally realized it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I simply lifted my finger, pressed the red button on the screen, and ended the call. Then with the same quiet decisiveness I blocked each number. Mom, Dad, Sabrina, one by one. Clean. Final. The room felt strangely warm after that, as if someone had opened a window I didn't know existed. I eased back against the pillows, the 4-line tugging gently at my arm. For the first time, the weight I'd carried my entire life, the invisible backpack filled with guilt, expectation, obligations, slid off my shoulders. And lying there listening to the soft rhythm of the heart monitor, I felt lighter, as if I had finally returned to myself, as if I had taken my first real breath in years. 6 months passed, then nearly a year, and the world slowly rearranged itself around me. Not violently, not dramatically, but gently, like a tide pulling back to reveal land I hadn't noticed before. Healing didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small, steady moments. The first morning I woke up without dread tightening my chest. The first meal I ate without calculating how much money I should be sending home. The first time I said no without apologizing or panicking afterward. I continued therapy every week. At first I sat stiffly in Dr. Land's office, unsure how to fill the silence. But the more I spoke, the more I unraveled years of swallowed words, the lighter my breath became. We talked about boundaries, grief, trauma patterns, and the kind of childhood that forms a person who mistakes self-abandonment for love. She taught me how to recognize the old guilt when it slithered back into my mind, how to stop reflexively giving, how to choose rest without shame. For the first time in my life, healing wasn't something I had to earn. It was something I was allowed. Physically, my recovery was slow but steady. I reduced my work hours, took more breaks, slept more than I had in the last decade combined. My heart stabilized, my hands stopped shaking. The color returned to my face. Little by little, my body forgave me. I moved out of the cramped apartment I had once worked myself sick to afford and found a small studio in a quiet Boston neighborhood, sunlit, warm with hardwood floors that creaked softly. I decorated it in a way that felt like a conversation with myself. Shelves full of books, thriving potted plants, photos from hikes taken with Jenna, a candle that smelled like cedar and safety. Every detail mattered. Every detail said, "This home belongs to you." Career-wise, things began to shift too. With my master's degree finalized and my health improving, I applied for a clinical position at a youth support center across the river. When they offered me the job, a role with a reasonable caseload, better pay, and supervisors who valued boundaries, I cried in my car for 10 minutes before calling Jenna. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because someone finally wanted me without trying to take from me. Working with teenagers who reminded me so much of my younger self felt like purpose, not duty. And it felt like life giving something back, one gentle piece at a time. With the money I no longer funneled into my parents' emergencies, I created a small scholarship fund. Nothing fancy, just enough to help 1 or 2 social work students a year, specifically those who came from chaotic or neglectful families. Felt right. It felt like alchemy, turning years of pain into support for someone who might never hear, "I'm proud of you," at home. My chosen family grew naturally. Jenna, of course, loud, loving, fiercely protective. A few co-workers who understood exhaustion on a visceral level. A small support group I joined, filled with people who also came from families where love was conditional and help was currency. We celebrated each other's wins. Therapy milestones, new jobs, tiny promotions, birthdays with homemade cupcakes. One evening, they surprised me with a small celebration for receiving my clinical license. Nothing extravagant. Just takeout food, laughter, and a card they all signed with the words, "We're proud of you." No one had ever said that to me without expecting something in return. I cried quietly in the kitchen while they joked in the living room, letting the warmth in my chest seep into places I thought were permanently numb. As for my parents and Sabrina, information trickled in through distant acquaintances, old neighbors, and occasional Facebook posts I didn't ask to see. Their financial troubles worsened after I cut ties. One of their properties was repossessed. Sabrina faced legal consequences for the car accident and had to attend mandated classes. My parents scrambled without the safety net I once provided. And from what I heard, they had begun turning on each other, each blaming the others for the fallout. They sent emails, sometimes long, meandering apologies filled with excuses. We were stressed. We didn't know the whole situation. Families fight. You misunderstood. Not once did they say, "We hurt you." Not once did they say, "We're sorry." Not once did they say, "We should have been there when you collapsed." I read their messages only once, then archived them without replying. Not out of hatred, not out of anger, but because healing had shown me something I'd never understood before. I was not responsible for fixing people who broke me. One evening in early spring, the air still crisp, but the trees just beginning to bud, I returned to my university. For the first time since my own collapse graduation, a new cohort of master's students was walking the stage, gowns fluttering in the wind, tassels swinging. I sat in the back row of the crowd, anonymous among cheering families and friends. Instead of pain, I felt a soft nostalgia settle over me. The keynote speaker, a graduate from their class, stepped up to the podium and began talking about boundaries, self-worth, and the courage to walk away from people who use love as leverage. Her voice rang through the courtyard, steady and bright. Sometimes, she said, choosing yourself means losing a family you never truly had. The words sank into me like warm sunlight. I placed a hand on my chest, feeling the calm, even rhythm of my heartbeat. Strong, steady mine. I realized then that I wasn't sad anymore, not angry, not grieving, just free. As the applause rose around me, I whispered the truth I had carried through the hardest months of my life. Words that finally felt like closure instead of confession. On the day I collapsed on that stage, the doctors called my parents. They never came. When I woke up in the hospital, my sister posted a photo. Family day without the drama. Days later, still weak and covered in wires, I saw 75 missed calls and a message. We need you. Answer immediately. Without thinking twice, I did what I should have done long ago. I didn't answer as the obedient daughter they expected. I answered as the woman I had finally become. That year I lost a family. But that year I found myself. And as the wind rustled through the graduation banners overhead, I knew I would never go back to who I was before. Not ever again. Call to action. My story might sound extreme, but I know so many of you out there have felt that burden, that pressure to always be the strong one for everyone else. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever reached your breaking point? What was the moment you finally chose yourself? Drop a comment below.